Okay, in this video I want to show you an application of pivot tables and pivot charts, namely slicers, which is a way to filter your data, and it's really nice when you're trying to get to know who your customers are, what they're buying, and really visualize the system or the data set that you're investigating. So if you start out with the starting file, you'll notice that we have a data set here broken up into two tabs. One is the movie sales data, which provides a list of various customers. On a particular date of call, they made a purchase of a movie at a given price, a purchasing amount. So the idea is that we would like to summarize this data to see if there's any relationships of the customers for potential use of cross-selling or upselling products to them. So if we look at the customer information tab, which is very practical in a sense that usually when we're dealing with database problems, our databases are separated. So in this activity, we're going to use these two tabs to simulate the process of mashing, if you will, the data together. So we have a customer info database with a customer number, a first and last name, their gender, and the age and where they live of the customers. Okay, so what you might want to do is actually integrate the movie sales database with the customer info. So if we go back to the customer info, we have, let's see, 5 columns that we would like to merge into the sales data. So I'm going to insert 5 columns. And I'm just going to simply copy these headers from one tab and paste it onto the next. And what I'd like to do is bring forth the data from the customer information tab onto this sheet, provided a certain customer. So in order to achieve this, we can use index match match. We're going to first use the first match to look up customer, which would provide the right row and the customer information data set. And then we'll use the second match to find the first, last, and gender and age and so forth. So let's go ahead and begin writing that formula. And before I do that, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so this is just a little easier to see. The first name will be index. The array that we're going to index is on the customer information sheet, and we want to index the column B through column F. So let's highlight this entire data set. I'm going to use the shortcut key because this data set is quite large at 500 samples. Let's lock in our referencing, comma, the row number would be match. The value that we're going to look up is the customer number. We're going to want to fill this formula to the right, so we definitely want to lock our columns, comma, customer info. Let's go ahead and select from A2 down, lock both rows and columns, comma, match type 0 for exact, parenthesis, which will close the first match statement. Now on to looking up the right column. Match. The lookup value here would be in the movie sale database, first name. We want to fill this down and to the right. When we fill it down, we don't want the row reference to move, so we're going to lock the row. But as we fill it to the right, we definitely want that column reference to change, so we're not going to lock the column. Comma, lookup array will be our column headings in the customer info. So that would be first name, last name, gender, age, and state. Definitely want to lock both rows and columns. Comma, match type would be 0 and followed by a parenthesis and another parenthesis to end the index formula. Enter. Now what we can do, always good idea to fill your formula to the right. Double click the final destination of where you fill to. Give it a visual inspection. What you actually might want to do is when you're referencing different tabs, what I like to do is always remove this reference, because what we're actually doing is referencing something on this page. So it can actually cause some problems later if you leave this reference and you do some sorting and things like that. So anything on this particular page, namely the movie sales data, and if you're referencing it on this page, there's no reason to keep it there. So I go ahead and delete that. So since I fixed this formula in F2, I'm going to copy this and paste it to my other locations. Visually, that turned out okay. We can use this nifty shortcut command, if you will. You double click this box on the bottom right, and it'll intelligently fill this formula all the way down to the end of the location. It knows how far to fill down because it knows there's data in the left-hand column, and that data goes down to row 2499. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back up. What you might want to do, since we have the first and last name in two different columns, we could actually concatenate or join column B and C together. So I'm going to right click and insert another column called last, comma, first name. And what I'm actually going to do is hit equals, put the last name. I'm going to join that with a concatenated symbol and with a text, comma, space, double quotes to end the text, concatenate with the first name. So let's hit enter. Now we have one column that lists the full name. So this will be useful in summarizing later, perhaps. It's just a good strategy to go ahead and build these types of things into your database, because you never know exactly how you use them later. Okay, you might be seeing this green message here. Excel is trying to warn you that you have some inconsistencies. In general, most of the time these can be ignored, and you can actually hit ignore error and things like that. So if you want to actually go one step further and highlight all of these and remove those warnings, by all means you can. So I highlighted the entire column. I'm going to go ahead and ignore this error so I don't have any marks. You might want to go ahead and provide a little bit of formatting to this table. I'm just going to give it a simple format of just borders, nothing fancy at this point, and give the column headings a fill of, let's say, light gray. Okay, so ultimately this will be the table that we use to summarize. The idea is we've brought information in from other sheets, if you will, other data sets, and this is going to be the one we summarize. The first thing we might want to do is to create a pivot table off of this information based on the items, the movies, the popular movies that are commonly purchased. So let's go ahead and go to Insert, Pivot Table. It's selecting the entire range for us, which is good. Let's go ahead and create a new worksheet. I'm going to title this worksheet Items Purchased Pivot. And essentially what I want to summarize is the item itself in terms of the rows, and just a simple count of those items. Okay, it's already displaying a number, which is exactly what I want. It's actually doing a count for all of the movies. What we could actually do is sort these values in descending order. The most commonly purchased movie in this data set was Batman Begins, followed by Pirates of the Caribbean, and so forth. Now, when creating a dashboard, it might not be useful to display all of these movies, and I don't know exactly how many unique instances there are, but what you might want to do is actually create a filter, a row filter here, based on the top 10%. And we can leave this as the top 10 items based on their count. Hit OK. And now we're just seeing a list of the top 10. We have 171 movies in the top 10. and the list is here. We might want to go back to our movies database and create a second pivot table based on gender. So let's go ahead and select Insert, Pivot. It's going to create the range for us, new sheet. And what we want to do is summarize the gender. So we essentially want to know when somebody is buying a movie, is there a tendency that females buy that movie or males? And we can link this with purchase amount, and rather than doing a sum, which might tell us how much males or females are spending, I just want to do a simple count. So I'm going to go to Field Value Settings and change this to a count. Hit Enter. And if you want to give your table perhaps a slightly different format, there's always some designs. Maybe I'll make this table gray since it's a neutral between females and males. Let's create a third pivot table after we name this. I'm going to name it Gender Pivot. Go back to our movie sales, insert a third pivot table that we're essentially going to link later with the slicers, which is a really neat feature, new to Excel 2010. Okay, so in our age, we have the age of our customers. In our row labels, we have anything from 18, it looks like, to 65 years of age. And I'm going to go ahead and use the purchase amount again here and change this to a count. And what might not be useful is seeing how many 18-year-olds purchased so many movies and so forth. What we could actually do is use this really cool feature called Group. I'm going to group these selections, and Excel automatically generates some starting and ending ranges based on the min, which we saw, and the max, and it's going to create these groups based on a grouping size of 10. So let's hit OK and see what that does. We actually have these nice groups now of customers in between the ages of 18 and 27 and so forth. So it's a nice way to quickly summarize data into groups, mutually exclusive groups. Okay, so now what we need to do is go ahead and rename this. I'm going to call it Age Pivot. Of course, you don't absolutely have to name that, but it's a good idea to keep all this separated. I'm going to start with my pivots and start to create the charts for those pivots, namely pivot charts. So first, when creating a dashboard, it's a good idea to create the pivot table, which will give you all sorts of extra features like grouping, like sorting, like filtering with the top 10 and so forth. Charts don't do that by default, so if you want that extra functionality, you can't just go ahead and jump into the pivot chart. So let's go ahead and create a pivot chart off of this item list. I'm going to go ahead and format this, trying to find a fill that I like. I'm going to use this one here with the red. So any items are going to be associated with red. I might break down, let's say, age with green and gender with maybe a neutral color like gray, just to keep it visually consistent. Okay, let's create our chart. If we go to Options under Pivot Table and go to Pivot Chart, we can create one. I'm going to create a bar chart. The first one will be fine. I'm going to keep the color consistent with being red. What we need to do is it's actually sorting these values based on the wrong order. So we have Batman Begins as the last item. What you can do is actually right click on these and go to Format Axis and show the categories in reverse order. So once you do that, Batman Begins will be number 1, followed by the Hunger Games and so forth, which is actually 16. Let's go ahead and hit close. For this chart, I want to control all my filtering with the slicers that we're going to be using. So I'm going to go into the Analyze button and turn off the field and the list. And I'm going to do some modifications to the layout here. Instead of saying total, I'm going to say top 10% of movies purchased. Okay. If we try to make this a little bit more visually appealing, I'm going to get rid of the axis. I'm going to get rid of the horizontal grid lines, the label, and I'm going to add things such as data labels on the outside, and just make the chart a little bit bigger for now. Good chance we'll resize this later. Okay, let's move on to the gender pivot. And let's go ahead and create a chart under options, pivot chart. Now this one might be better summarized with a pie chart because we want to break down our data into what percentage of females, what percentages of males are buying these items. Again, perhaps this is an exercise for learning more about your customers and actually wanting to cross-sell some of your products. Said okay. Let's go ahead and get rid of the field list. Let's go ahead and change the title to Gender Breakdown. No need for a legend if we actually add data labels and things like that. I'm going to say outside. If you right click on the legend, the data label, you can basically display a variety of information. I'm going to display the category name. It doesn't make sense in this example to display series name of the total, but you could certainly. I want to show the percentage, and that should be good enough. Maybe the number, so it's a little bit more readable. We could change to a number, but actually that will change the format of your percentage. So I'm going to leave it on general for now and just worry about the format. Now, one thing you can always do, if you wanted commas here on the number but not the percentage, the graphs generally are defaulted to whatever you're displaying from the data itself. So for example, here in the table. Now I did turn this off, but I just wanted to show you what you could do. If you go to options, field list, and this value of count, when we control the number format here to a number instead of general with commas, and there's no need for decimals, so I'll take it off, but the important part is to put commas here, we'll actually see the comma style being implemented in the chart. So that's kind of a neat feature. I'm going to just move these away so we see the leader lines. And perhaps if we're talking about gender, it would be a good idea to maybe change these colors, maybe to something more universal. If we right click and go to Format Data Point, we can change the fill from males. Let's make a solid color and maybe a baby blue. And if we click on the blue part, maybe we want to fill that with maybe a pink color. You can always go to More Colors, Standard. Here's a slew of colors you might want to choose, and hit OK. So now we have that pivot chart. Let's do one more for age. I'm going to say my age is summarized as green, so I'm going to use this one here. This one, just to create another type of chart, let's use a column chart versus the bar chart that we used before. So let's go ahead and click column. Again, I'm going to turn off the field buttons and the field list, change the title to age breakdown. Okay. Let's go ahead and close that. Let's go ahead and also turn off the legend, the grid lines, and the horizontal axis. Change this to our green. And perhaps we'd like to show the count. So let's go ahead and show those data labels outside. Okay. So now we probably want to start thinking about utilizing the slicers and creating the slicers. We can wait until we have all of the slicers. We can wait until after we have our graphs displayed on our dashboard before we actually create the slicers. There's a reason why we have to link the slicers together, and it might be easier to do that once we have all of the charts on one page. But if you want to do it before, we can certainly do that. I'm going to create a sheet here called dashboard. Let's be more specific. Let's say movie sales dashboard. Okay. Let's go back to our pivots, and while we're here, let's go ahead and create the slicers. So if we hit the pivot table and we go into options, we have this option called a slicer. Now again, a slicer is used to filter your data. So if you can read the little description, it says insert a slicer to filter data interactively. Slicers make it fast and easy to filter pivot tables and cube functions. Okay, so we're definitely summarizing data in this example. So let's go ahead and insert the slicer. And what we want to control with this slicer is the item itself. So eventually when we're utilizing our dashboard, we can click on a certain movie, an item if you will, and see out of our current customers who is actually purchasing the movie in terms of our other breakdowns like gender and or age. So we're going to control this pivot based on the item slicer. And to be consistent, I'm going to make that red. Let's go to gender. Let's go ahead, click the pivot table, and go to slicer again. And we would like to control that based on gender, or row label if you will. Let's hit OK. Instead of blue, I'm going to say it's a neutral gray color. And I'm just going to undo that a second. So both are lit. We'll see the application of hitting them later. Let's go to age, create another slicer based on age. And I'm going to make this green. And that should be about it. Let's go ahead and move this back down to 100. Okay, so now on our dashboard we can create a tab, rename it dashboard. The goal is to move all of those charts and slicers into one sheet and try to make it look as good as possible and as functional as possible. So I'm going to move both of these at the same time, and you might have noticed when I did this, I selected the first chart and then I held in control with the mouse and clicked the second. Certainly if you're having trouble doing that, you can click on one at a time and move them to the dashboard. But to save some time in the video, I'm going to click one, hold down control now, and click the other, and there's a specific point at where you have to click this slicer. You have to click it on the very end like most Excel objects. So let's hit Control X to cut it. Let's move it to the dashboard here. Let's go to gender. Let's do the same thing. Click, Control click, cut. Let's put that here. And let's see the age. Click, Control click on the border. Cut and paste. So now we have all of our information, all of the things that we want to display. Let me go ahead and zoom out in this example. I want to start creating the layout of my dashboard. So perhaps we would want our gender breakdown over here. Maybe all of our slicers will be over here. We basically have our demographics at the bottom of the dashboard, our movies and slicer information to the right. I'm going to go ahead and pull this across just to make it a little bit more visual. What you can actually do if you don't want these things to move on you, you can actually do a similar function of hitting Control and selecting these Excel objects, and under drawing tools you can say group. So now if you start to move one, you really move everything, so it's kind of a neat feature. I'm going to go ahead and stretch the movie list down to fill up the screen here, and I'm just going to simply put the gender and age slicer here, and I'm going to group those as well, and we could actually group it with the other group if we choose to do so. So let's go to Format, Group, Group. So now again, if we move one, we're moving the whole screen, which is pretty nice. Okay, but before we do any more with the visuals, we actually have to link these slicers back to our pivot tables. And the way to do that, we can click. It's a little easier if you did this before you grouped, because when you click it wants to select everything. But if you single click here in the slicer, you can have control of just this object. So right click and go to Pivot Table Connections, and we want this slicer to actually filter not only pivot table 1 like we had indicated, but also control the pivot tables number 2 and 3, the age pivot and the gender pivot. So as you start to slice this down, it will actually slice the other data sets or the other pivot tables, which is really the power of why slicers are important. Right click on the gender, pivot connections. We want this to control all pivot tables. Same thing for age. Select everything here. Hit OK. You could do some other formatting. You know, if this isn't visually appealing enough for you, we could perhaps make this a little bit more bold with you know, a bigger bar, if you will. We could do the same thing here with a gap. Maybe we want these to be a little bit different, and so forth. So, you know, all the common formatting things you can do with these pivot charts, no problem. So we might be asking ourselves, well, okay, here are the top 10% of the movies purchased. What demographic, you know, are actually buying this? It looks normally distributed with a mean around 38 to 47 years of age. If we wanted to dig into this a little bit more, because this is actually considering the entire all of the movies, especially the top 10%. If we just wanted to look at, let's say, Batman Begins, we can find it on our list and simply click that. And now it's going to tell us that 19 videos were purchased by these customers. Our breakdown is that 53% of males, 47% of females are buying this. It still looks fairly normal with an average age of 38 to 47 and so forth. If we're just targeting, let's say, males, we can click on the male slicer and get a little bit more information here about the males that are buying this. Tends to be, and I'm just trying to move this this leader line here, tends to be our males have the same age in terms of our demographic, 38 to 47. Okay, perhaps we want to check out other movies. Perhaps we want to compare that to the females. So when we click on the females, it's going to hide all the males. This demographic of age breakdown is a little bit different than we've seen. It's definitely not normal. This data set was generated synthetically or randomly created, so it just for the sake of the example. but we can definitely have some fun with this and start clicking on various movies and getting a breakdown of who are purchasing these movies. And certainly use this in our advertising or marketing campaigns to send out perhaps more emails to males, in this case of the movie 300, where we have 75% of the males in our database bought this movie versus only 25% females. So we can start to understand our demographics of who is actually ordering these, and then tailor our advertising and our specials and our all of our services that we can provide to that demographic that is actually most likely to take us up on the opportunity. I'm going to highlight all of these movies again. So if you start with 300, what you can actually do is hold in Control Shift and then hit the very last item, and we'll show now actually all of the movies. So anywhere from Batman Begins to Liar Liar, which looks like it's the last one on the list. You got to be a little careful when you do things like selecting all. It negates the filter of the top 10 that we put on. Just to give you a heads up, you can always go back to the movie, the items purchased, and apply that value filter of top 10. And when you go back to your dashboard, it'll be back. So anyway, you can start to see the power of pivots, and it really gives you insight to your customers. The only other thing I wanted to mention in this video is sometimes grid lines and things like that aren't necessarily appealing. We can always go to View, turn off the grid lines, so now you don't see any. Perhaps there's no reason to show the formula bar, and perhaps there's no reason to show the headings. And in fact, if you're giving this to somebody, there's probably no reason to show the ribbon at all. So you can sit here and control the look and feel of your dashboard. And finally, if you actually wanted to hide all these tabs, and I'm holding in Control and clicking these, you can hide actually everything by right clicking and say hide and only show them the dashboard, which is pretty cool.